Hello, everyone. My name is Gitika Gorthy, and today I'm here with a very special guest, Dr. Vello. Dr. Vello is a medical register doctor working towards dual specialization in both acute medicine and intensive care in the UK. In parallel with her clinical jobs as an MD, she is also an aerospace medical research doctor and coordinates the medical team for the Austrian Space Forum, who are working to optimize crew and astronaut health during Mars analog missions. This operational experience as a field medical doctor, work with Public Health England, and her master's in public health medicine led her to work with the UN as a part of the Space for Global Health Working Group as a co-lead for the SGAC Space Medicine and Life Sciences Group. Her achievements as an early aerospace medical doctor and researcher were recognized in the form as of the ASMA International Scholarship at the 2019 conference in Las Vegas. I am so excited to be able to talk with such an amazing woman in the space industry who's doing something that I want to do in the future. Welcome, Dr. Vello. Thank you so much for taking some time out of your busy schedule to talk to me today.
Thanks, Jessica. How are you? How's
I'm
everything?
doing well.
Yeah, brilliant. What would you like to ask me? Should we go through
Yeah.
the first question?
Yeah. So before we kind of get into understanding more about your journey, because I'd love to learn more about how you got interested in this, I'd like to understand more about your typical day. I'm sure it's a little different because of the pandemic, but how does it usually run? What do you do?
So like you said, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, a lot of it has been very clinical. So I've been working in hospital a lot as an intensivist, but and an acute medic, so very front facing. So anyone who's very sick who comes into resus, we try and stabilize, and then we get into the hospital. So that's been my typical day at the moment. But before the pandemic, it was a balance of trying to do all my clinical work with all the research that I do in the aerospace sector. And that could be, so there is no typical day. They're very atypical days because the clinical shifts can be a long day or a twilight, which is like an evening shift or a night, and a lot of weekends. So basically, you have to work your research around that. So as any medical researcher will tell you, that's basically what you do. So you do it in allocated off days or study leave days, or just squeeze it in whenever you can. And
Yeah.
because space medicine is such an international field, you have to make time to make those meetings either before night shift or after night shift to compensate for the time differences. So I work with people in Australia, but also all the way through to America, the Americas and Canada. So it's very broad in terms of time zones. So it's very international. And it can be things like doing data analysis, writing papers, and also going off to conferences and speaking at international conferences, but also going on really exciting missions in the pre-hospital environment where you get to go to deserts or glaciers to help with look after patients astronauts in spacesuits. So it can be very variable day to day and requires months of planning in advance to try and make it work.
Yeah, I think that's amazing that first of all, you're able to make time for this interview. And also, I feel like that's what's amazing about the space industry or the medical. I feel like you're always, on top of your feet, critical thinking, problem solving, and adjusting your schedule. So I think that's definitely great. And I'm very curious to like kind of jump into your research. Like, what are you currently researching in space medicine?
So I'm doing lots of different research projects, but I guess the main focus would be my work with the Austrian Space Forum. So what the Austrian Space Forum does is runs analog missions. So an analog mission is like a space mission. You're almost doing a test drive for a real space mission on the ISS, on the International Space Station or moon base. The Austrian Space Forum missions are mainly to look at different structures of working or mechanisms of working for a Mars mission. So how do astronauts work with suits within the restricted ergonomics of the suit to do an EVA, but also work with robotics and other devices in order to do experiments or research. My job as part of the medical team, so now as the chief medical officer, but previously as part of one of the medical doctors on site, is to look after the astronaut in the suit. And what we're doing is we get lots of information that we synthesize from the suit. So we get to know what's the suit humidity, what's the suit temperature, in-suit ECG or EKG, depending on where you are, which tells us about your heart rhythm and heart rate. But we also get to ask the questions periodically and run a questionnaire to assess the psychology of an astronaut within the suit, which is really, really important. So psychology goes hand in hand with team dynamics, decision making, problem solving, and the ability to function as an astronaut, which is just as important as the physiology, which is how your heart's working, how your blood pressure is. All of those things are important to your health, but also thinking about psychology. And my research focus is both on the physiology as well as the psychology, as well as the human factors of an astronaut on the field. So for example, one of the things that we looked at, one of the experiments we did on the IgnitedThinkers mission in Oman was looking at astronaut and crew fatigue. And we measured crew fatigability using a spring-loaded device and hand grip strength as a indirect measure of fatigue. It's not perfect, but it's one of the things that can be done to try and measure fatigue on a quantitative scale, so on a numerical scale. So what we did was we measured the hand grip before they went on mission, but also at the beginning of the day and after the end of the day for astronauts and crew. So we had 15 crew and 5 astronauts, 1 female and 4 male. And the data that we're getting is very interesting and will be published shortly. But essentially, we match that against the physiological parameters, like the heart rate variability, etc., during the EVA, the blood pressure, etc. But also, what were they doing in terms of team dynamics, and how were they working with each other and by themselves as an autonomous individual? So we're looking at all these different parameters and trying to work out how long the EVAs should be, whether we should have more breaks during the EVAs. Are certain experiments more are they more fatigable after certain experiments? And therefore, how do you then feed back as a medical doctor into the flight plan to try and optimize that so that you have a functioning astronaut that can work for days on end in a remote environment, remote extreme environment like space? So that's essentially one of the projects that we're doing. We're doing lots of other things, but that's probably one of the interesting ones.
That is so cool. And just to confirm, how are you able to, simulate the environment, how astronauts will behave in space?
And so what we do for our Mars analog simulations is we, with the Austrian Space Forum, is we go to an extreme setting. So the Amity 18 mission was in Oman. It was 5 weeks long. 1 week was a setup period or setup phase where we test all the different devices. And the other 4 weeks are in complete isolation. So the crew is completely isolated in the middle of the desert, in the Dhofar Desert. Other missions have been in caves or on, say, the Crown-Natal Glacier, which was in Amity 2015. So that's the extreme environment. So you've got the extreme setting, which tries to replicate some of the elements of Mars. So either the polar regions or the equatorial region. So that's one thing. The second thing is that during the actual mission phase, when we're live on mission, you have a time delay between the crew who are on site in Oman and the mission control center, which is up to 100 to 150 people in Vienna or in Innsbruck, so somewhere in Austria. So the mission control center is basically a group of different sub-teams, just like you would have for other aerospace medical missions. So basically you have a flight planning team, you have the medical team, you have people who are part of the research team and who are pulling out the data analysis that you're getting from the research projects for that mission. And you have international crew who are elsewhere in different places. So they're the actual experts for the research teams who feed back. So that's the infrastructure, and it's very much like a real mission. So therefore, the science that you're getting out of it will hopefully act as a test run for protocols that you can try and fine tune for future missions for Moon or Mars. So that's the setup for it.
Yeah, that sounds really amazing. That's exactly like whenever I read papers or I read, journals of people who did research, and it sounds very similar to what you're doing right now. I personally have been very interested in like determining how certain like the brain can differ in space and certain diseases can differ in space because of microgravity. So I've always been interested in that. And I'm curious because you got into space medicine, was there a specific like type of doctor that you specialized as, or did you become like a general doctor, or like how do you actually work in the space industry as a doctor?
So there's no straightforward answer to that, because every single flight surgeon, as they're called by the agencies, will have gone through a different path. You have some flight surgeons who are neurologists, so they go to med school, they train as a neurologist, and then they apply for the position of flight surgeon. There are some people who basically go through military training, so the military pathway, and therefore the flight surgeon training is integrated into their pathway. So that's very different. And some people who do so in the UK, and I can only speak for myself. So what I did was I did my GCSEs and A levels, so high school, then applied for medical school, went through medical school, did an additional degree during medical school for a year, which is called an integrated degree. And then you do your internship or your foundation years. So in the UK, you have 2 years of foundation training. And mine was an academic foundation program. So there's only a few in the UK, but essentially it means you can bolt on research onto it. And you have dedicated research time. So I've very much followed a research pathway because I'm really passionate about learning new things and about doing that. So my research as a foundation trainee was on pre-hospital medicine in extreme environments and public health. So looking at disaster management and global health. So that's how I got into the SGAC. And then after that, I did an academic clinical foundation program. So that clinical fellowship even. And that is also with the NIHR. And that was very much a combination of different placements. So in the UK, you can do something called the acute care common stream pathway, which is a bit of acute medicine, a bit of A&E, some intensive care, as well as a bit of experience with surgery and surgical procedures. So it's a little bit of a medical buffet. So you get to do a bit of everything, and you get to have a taste in everything. And at the end of that, you can decide whether you want to go down one route or another. So which sort of acute specialty route you want to go down. And I did that again with research bolted on to that. And thereafter, I did a little bit more anesthesia with intensive care. So intensive care was my main sort of specialty in terrestrial medicine, as it were, and with some pre-hospital expeditions, so expedition medicine or wilderness medicine. And those were additional courses that were done away from my training program or apart from my training program. And then at the moment, I'm switching from anesthesia to do acute medicine with intensive care. So slightly different convoluted pathway. And at the end of the day, I think there's two things to take away. There's one thing is that you can either do pure operational space medicine. So you can work at ESA or NASA or JAXA, so one of the agencies, and you can work in-house as a flight surgeon. But most of the time, the flight surgeons have terrestrial experience. So they've done emergency medicine, or they've got their boards in something or the other. And if you look at examples of the NASA flight surgeons, a lot of them are EM trained, so emergency medical trained. So that's one of the pathways. So that's operations. And the other half is the medical research pathway, where you do terrestrial medicine, but you also do aeromedical research as well. So you do all the data analysis, all the research that goes up to station, and also all the analog stuff. So there's different pathways to try and follow aerospace medicine as a career.
That is amazing. I think that's exactly what I was like kind of researching now that I'm, almost graduating high school and I'm looking into colleges and degrees. I'm kind of like, I really want to do this. I'm just not sure how to do it. So I think that's very interesting. Currently, I'm actually writing this white paper on the vagus nerve and how it can be impacted in space, because the vagus nerve has a huge impact on like seizures or like syncope. I know the astronauts who do go to space are very fit and very healthy, but to see how certain, like for example, for space commercialization in the future, for like regular general public to potentially go to space, I think understanding how like certain parts of your nervous system can, be impacted, and how like everyone has a certain different level of health conditions. So I'm actually doing research on that, and I was like, this is what I want to do when I grow up. And I was like, it's so cool to see someone who's doing exactly what I want to do. And so now it comes to my next question, which is, how did you get into space medicine? I feel like it's such a unique career. And when I'm meeting individuals, it's like a very tight group. There's such few people in the industry and few women in the industry. So how did you kind of get into space medicine? What's the kind of your story?
So I guess when I was at school, I was very geeky. I did biology, physics, maths as my core subjects for my A levels in the UK. So before I went to university, I went to space summer schools because my mum was a working mum. She's a biochemist. So essentially, she she was working through the holidays, and so I went to a lot of physics camps and like STEM-based summer school programs where I built rockets and did lots of experiments. So I think that probably ignited my love for science, because it wasn't just being taught how to do it on a blackboard or whiteboard, but but actually engaging with experiments probably is the best way to learn about science, the practical elements of it. And I really loved that. And I also got to go on lots of different tasters during my high school. So we got to do lots of work experience in different sectors. So I shadowed teachers and lawyers, and went to a laboratory, went to lots of different places to learn about different careers. And I think going to hospital and shadowing a colorectal surgeon probably was my first introduction to medicine, and I realized that this is what I want to do, and that's probably what I wanted to do. And so I applied for med school and got into med school. And then in my third year, I really love physics, and I wanted to do something to do with medical physics, or combine my interest in space and medicine. So I started actually just Googling for, who else has my career. And that's all you can do, right? You start reading around, you start reading about people's experiences. And the European Space Agency had a specific program for medical students where I was lucky enough to apply to, and they were asking for ideas of how to basically help astronauts whose heart stop. So how do you do CPR in space? And so I proposed my idea, and I didn't expect to get in, but I was one of the lucky few who got to go to Cologne and had this experience where I met astronauts and flight surgeons at ESA. And that's pretty much what kickstarted everything, because from that I kept in touch with the faculty, and I asked them how to get more involved, and started right at the bottom, helping with very, very much with data analysis and literature reviews, and then started building up my experience to a point where I could help from an operational point of view. So I think that's over time, it sort of just snowballs and becomes the career that I have always dreamed of and always wanted. But by no means has it been easy. It had lots of challenges along the way, but at the same time, that's pretty much what kickstarted everything.
Yeah, I had a similar like ignition. Like, so I got into rocketry in middle school through an after school club. And at that time I was a super science-based student. I loved biology. I would do everything biology. I loved, neuroscience. I went to a lot of programs on that, and then I got into space. And so I was kind of diverging into space, and I was like, I love engineering. I love astrophysics. And then I was kind of like, but I can't give up on all the work and all the interest I have in biology. And so I literally searched up, you won't believe me, space medicine. And I didn't know that was real. I just thought I was putting two random words together because it's not even a career I've known anyone do. So to see that it's an actual existing career and to do something I love, because I don't want to be like very stereotypical and just become a regular doctor. I've always been someone who likes to, do something unique and like do something different. So when I, like heard about this, it was like, I want to do this for sure. So I'm so like grateful to have read about it and, see it such inspirational women. And of course, there's a lot of challenges like you've mentioned. So what is like your biggest challenge or hurdle that you've had to overcome in order to, become who you are today?
I think on reflection, the biggest challenge I think I've had to overcome, and probably all women have to overcome, is something called imposter syndrome. So it's very intrinsic, and it's that constant voice that says, no, you can't do this. And everyone faces it. And I don't think it's just unique to women. It's probably, across the board, anyone who is high achieving will probably have that. And that is a big challenge because it's fueled by also the external factors that say, no, you can't do this. This is impossible. What are you doing? Just do something vanilla. Just stick with the program and do what everyone else is doing in medicine. And I've had that throughout. So I had a science teacher who basically said, "You want to be an astronaut, doctor? What is that?" And and you have teachers. So I've had teachers who said that to me. I've had my mentors or supervisors at medical school and as a postgraduate doctor who basically said, "No, you cannot do this. You can't do this." And it's those constant no's from outside and inside that are probably the biggest challenge, and that everyone will have a different coping mechanism to feeling like an imposter, feeling inadequate, even though you're just doing what you absolutely love and what you're good at, which is two very important things. So I think the way that I've overcome it over the years is lots of different ways, but the main thing is to have a good infrastructure, social infrastructure around you. So I have a lovely husband. I have an amazing family who've always championed me, especially my mother. And that's really important. But also, every time I get a rejection or I have a failure or perceived failure, I will write it down and put it in a box. And I'll have another box which basically has all the things that I've achieved or I feel like, are an achievement for me. So just like watching, I don't know, watching the stars and just getting out there, or that for me is a personal achievement, like doing something or watching an eclipse. I'll put that in the next box. And whenever I'm feeling low, I can see the rejections that I've overcome in a physical way, and I can see all the things that I've achieved in a physical way, which give me a boost. And I think that that's really important because everyone has their ups and downs, and it's important to have insight into the fact that there will be ups and downs. And for every up that you see in somebody else's profile, they have had 10 different failures or 20 different failures behind it. And that's not going to change. It's life, and it's how you overcome that psychological barrier to move forward. And that's what's really important.
I think those are some amazing words. I feel like that's a great strategy also to show that the good that you've done is so much more greater than the failures you've had, and you've done so much to overcome them, which, sometimes like, my parents always say, you're looking at the black dot in the white paper. So you're looking at that one bad thing that happened to you when you have so many other great stuff happening. And I'm always like, that's so true. And that's how I try thinking about all my failures. I'm always like, okay, this is a black dot. I got to think about the white. So just not to get myself, stuck at that one point. And so I definitely agree that there are failures from like a young age all the way to, when you're in your career midway, when you're like, older even. So I feel like it's always important to like keep rooted and like remember all the achievements you've had and how much you've struggled. I feel like medical school is one of the hardest career choices, first of all. Like law, medicine is very hard because you have to study so much. And then on top of that, if you're adding something that is very new into the mix, I feel like a lot of people, it's very non-traditional. So, I think being able to just follow your passions is important, which kind of leads me to my next question is what advice would you give for students to follow their passions? And like, how early do you think passions are identified? Because I feel like there's this norm that passions are identified when you're like 2 years old, or when you're in college. So, what's your like a take on that?
So I think that passions are very fluid. They're very dynamic. I don't think that anyone has one singular passion. I think you obviously have multiple passions that you try and coalesce together to try and make your life work. And passions don't have to be restricted to your professional setting. So for me, it's space and medicine, but also your personal passions. And I'm really passionate about singing and musicals and performing arts and doing all of that. And it's trying to find a balance between to make yourself feel fulfilled. And recently, I've read a lot about a Japanese philosophy called Ikigai, and there's lots of different philosophies out there. But Ikigai basically is about trying to work out what's your mission and your vocation, and how does that balance out with your passions. It's a bit more complex than that, but in essence, you're trying to it's just taking work-life balance, which is very binary, to the next level. So you're trying to see, okay, what are you good at, and what do you love doing, and your passion should be fueled by both of those things. And it's, are you good at biology? Are you good at that? Then maybe you should. Do you like doing it? Do you love doing it? And do you want to do it for the rest of your life? Then yes, then this is the career for you. And that's probably true for any career. Do you like building things? Do you like being more practical with your hands? Then certain specialties within medicine are probably for you, like surgery rather than general internal medicine, for example. So it's very much driven by what your personality type is, and what how you have been. And as we get older, we grow as individuals. We start seeing the world through different lenses or different perspectives. And I don't think that you should always focus on one passion, but you should just be open to there not being a box at all, because you can't just have a box and put passions in. I think it's just so much more than that. And what I've always done is said yes to the things that I absolutely love doing, and that's why I always try and make time for those extra things that I love doing, like going for walks or getting out there with nature, and thinking about spending time with my family if I can, and playing a board game. It's just as important as going to work every day, and doing all the research stuff. So just thinking about work-life balance in terms of your passions and your mission and vocation is very important. And I think that you're too young to think about that. I think at the moment, when you're younger, you love everything, and everything, and you don't really know what you're good at until you try it. And that's what school's for. School's there for you to try different subjects, to work out where and don't be limited to one thing or a couple of things. Try a bit of everything, and that's what work experience is there for, and asking people is there. And then as you progress through your university career, I know people who've changed, careers from engineering to medicine, or medicine to philosophy. There's so many different paths in life, and it depends on what you love doing. And as long as if there comes a day when you're like, actually, I don't like what I'm doing anymore, I don't like doing this sort of part of my life, then drop it and do something else. And that's what's really important, is to have insight into and be tuned into your own personal thermometer about whether you're feeling happy and fulfilled in how your life is structured. And if not, you need to think about restructuring it.
I think life balance is definitely important. How do you manage to keep your skills current? Because I feel like the medical and space industry are two industries that constantly change and constantly require new skills and new certifications. So how do you keep up with this constant change while keeping a balanced life? And like, how do you foresee changes in the space industry and medical industry?
So how do I keep it all balanced? I don't, and sometimes I drop the balls, because you're trying to juggle all of these different elements. And I'm not a superhuman. I am human. And at the end of the day, I would love to have skills like the Avengers, doing a bit of everything. But at the end of the day, I think that it's just about mapping out your calendar so that you have a different time period dedicated to a certain task. So if I'm doing, say this week might be a space heavy week, whereas next week may be more clinical. And it's completely driven by my base specialty, so by my intensive care rota. So depending on that, I can just then slot in other meetings or writing papers or doing a bit of education. And that's it just depends on, and I'm sure that you probably struggle with this too, because you probably have to juggle school with everything else that you do outside of school and all the hobbies. Like, I don't know, I remember going to do dance and flying and all this other stuff at school. So I think it's there's no answer and no like easy answer to that question, and everyone finds their sort of balance point, and for that balance point is different for everyone. It's not the same, and you have to find it yourself. You have to find out what works for you, and it might be that you get to a point where you want to do 60% of clinical medicine, 20% of something else. And again, it's not arbitrary, it's not mathematical, and there's no formula for it. Just like there's no formula for happiness. And I think that, like, just going back to it, you have to work out what makes you feel fulfilled, but also not burnt out. So it's a fine line between doing everything and saying yes to everything, and then suddenly coming to a point where you burn out. And I've burnt out before. And when you burn out, you need to recognize that you've burnt out. So burnout is basically where you don't realize it, but you say yes to so many projects, and then suddenly come to a point where you feel so tired that you can't actually concentrate on any of those projects. I mean, that's a very simple definition for it. And I've definitely been burnt out in my life before, and that's where I've had to change, different aspects of my career, or change, those percentage points to try and work out how much time I dedicate to that. And a really important thing is, when you do feel like you're burning out, is to stop and have a holiday from everything, and just get away from it, and also build in breaks into your life. And I think adulting is very different, because as a kid, you have summer holidays, you have Christmas holidays, you have breaks already built in. But as an adult, you have to build those breaks in yourself. And that self-directed awareness that you're human and that you need sleep, and you need to have time away from projects, is just as important to drive projects forward and to be productive. Because productivity is also about rest. And that's really important to realize.
Yeah, sometimes you can aimlessly sit in front of your computer, for hours doing nothing. And sometimes you're like super productive for 1 hour and you get so much done. So I definitely agree on that point. And to kind of wrap up the interview, because I know I already took so much of your time, is what advice, if you could give any to your younger self or to the young people out there listening, what advice would you give from your life experience so far to the children out there in pursuit of, pursuing their dreams and their future career?
So I think that you shouldn't let your failures get you down, is one thing that's really important. And I really love your analogy of, the black dot and the white paper, and focusing, on all the positives out there. That's the first thing. And that will drive your enthusiasm and passion, which you guys probably already have in STEM and aerospace. But also saying yes to practical science, to actually engaging with experiments and going out there and joining astronomy clubs, and looking at, there's so many resources out there from agencies like NASA and ESA and JAXA about how to get more involved and learn more about the space sector, about science and biology and chemistry. So definitely do get more engaged with online e-learning programs, but also after COVID, maybe after the pandemic, into clubs that help you engage with science on a practical level. And another way is to also think about work experience. And if you've got, if your parents or their friends are involved in a specific sector that you're interested in, just say, can I come and see what you do? for a couple of days. And that's really, really important because it gives you a flavor. It doesn't give you the full picture, but a flavor of what happens in industry, either engineering or at university. And if you don't have any links, then just approach a university and just say, I'd really like to know what an aerospace engineer does, or what a medical doctor does, and you can try and get that experience. And I think that experience will then help you network with people that are in positions to give you advice about those specific STEM careers that you're passionate about. But also, you can rule out things that you don't want to do and move on to the next thing about ruling in things that you do want to do. And I think it's this constant sort of process of thinking about, okay, these are my passions, but what is actually feasible and what is actually, workable? And you will only get that with experience.
Yeah, I think always remembering that failure is not your stopping point and you can move past it. And there's so much greater stuff you did. And always remembering to dip your feet and not stick with your comfort zone. I feel like that's something that my mom always stressed. I remember when I was in middle school, my tech ed teacher was like, you know, you join rocketry club, get a guy, I know you're gonna love it. And I'm like, rocketry, what? I mean, I wasn't into rocket, I didn't even know I could do rocketry, but I took the risk to join it, which is why I was able to like get into such a new industry. Otherwise, I probably still would have been on my path to, probably becoming just a regular doctor. So I feel like being able to dip your feet in other stuff and explore. I know ever since I was a little kid, I was like, I want to be a teacher, I want to be a lawyer, I want to be, a lot of stuff. I did many careers, and to be able to rule out the stuff I really want to do and stuff I don't want to do was really important to me. So I think those are some amazing words and amazing advice for me and other people to always remember as we're actually trying to get into the career that we want to do. So I want to thank you so much, Dr. Vello. This is like one of the best interviews I've conducted, and I want to thank you so much for your time. I know I was a longer interview, but I want to thank you because it was so helpful to get insight into a career that I really want to do when I grow up, and to hear such inspiring words from you. So thank you for your time.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for being such an amazing interviewer. And it was really fun to talk to you about aerospace medicine.
Thank you.